everyone, and welcome to CFPR seminar, lunchtime seminar series. Today, we are very honored to have Professor Yuying Tong, who's our good friends for a number of years or decades, to join us today. And I believe this might be her third time presenting in the series. So we are very pleased to have her here and presenting her new work with us. So let me briefly introduce Prof. Yuying Tong. So Prof. Tong is a professor of sociology at Chinese University of Hong Kong. She's also directing the Center for Chinese Family Studies at CUHK, as well as serving as the Assistant Dean for Research in the Faculty of Social Sciences at CUHK. So she's a leading expert on migration and family and life course, particularly in the context of China. So she has published widely on this topic in leading sociology and demography journals, including American Journal of Sociology, Social Forces, Journal of Marriage and Family, and so many other journals as well. So we are very pleased to welcome her today and looking forward to hearing about her new work, which is titled Gender Pattern in Livelihood Choice and Consequences for Rural Household over the Transition Period in China. So without further ado, please let me invite Prof. Tong to give her presentation.
Thank you so much, Pook, for the very kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation. I'm glad also see Jean and other friends here. This actually is my second time, but I indeed had another presentation in the air when I visited Singapore in 2019. I look forward to visiting you guys again and maybe seeing you in PA before I can visit Singapore. So I will first share my slides now. So can you see it properly? It looks okay, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to have the chance to share my recent work in the CFPR for my second time. And actually last time when I visited Singapore, the topic actually was kind of related to this one. Today's topic is about the gender pattern in livelihood choices and consequence for rural households in China. And this is a co-authored work with my former PhD student and also the postdoc, Gan Yiqing. She now has moved back to mainland China to work in Fudan University as a assistant professor last year, August. So before I start, I wanted to show that actually this work can be divided into two separate studies under the same grant. The first one is expanding search for work, the gender gap in rural Chinese people's livelihood changes from 1989 to 2015. And the second one is household heads' livelihood choices and household income growth in China from 2010 to 2018. So I will mainly focus on the first one. I will also kind of briefly introduce the second study if the time allows. So for those of you who are not familiar with China's rural context, I wanted to give you more background of it, especially for rural area. In the past few decades, rural areas around the world have experienced rapid growth in the diversification of rural household livelihood strategies. So in general, there are two patterns. One is livelihood has become disassociated with agriculture over time, gradually. And the second one is increased labor mobility separates the location of the work and home places from rural people. So therefore, rural people's livelihood choices has experienced a space expanding gradually when they search for their work. And this is an overall world trend. Then how about China? When did it start in China? In China, the diversification process was accompanied by some important historical periods, so I can introduce you briefly. The first one is 1958, the Great Leap Forward, which was inaugurated by China Mao and has a strategy of the walking on the two legs. The two legs are one is a farmer and the other is rural industry. That means at that time, the government already initiated the non-farming work in the rural community. So there are lots of the theoretical debates about the Great Leap Forward and its consequence. One is a liberation theory. It argues that a woman can get out of the house and work just like men, especially during that time. Some of the role models like Iron Girl, the kind of just mainly a stand down woman, so they can work in the field as men, and they also work in the local industry, so do the similar job as men, so they are called the Iron Girl. So they set the model, they set the example for rural women. And another perspective argues that Great Leap Forward has seen a woman from the victim perspective. It argues that women substitute for men and freed men to undertake new projects, such as development of rural industry and a concentration on more complicated and advanced technology. So here just some examples of the women during the Great Leap Forward. They get out to work on the farmers and give the priority of men to work in the industry area. So then the Great Leap Forward was kind of the strategy of the collectivization. So this collectivization dismantled the household as a production unit, but at the same time facilitated the women's participation in agricultural work. However, women receive lower work points, which is a reward system under collectivized farming. Although they did similar work as men, but they received a lower point. Then during the early economic reform era, the main strategy changed to people are more likely to pursue the non-farm work in the village and township enterprises, which means that they mainly stay in the township areas, do not go far away, but they can do the non-farm work in their township. Then early economic reform era, which was launched in the 1970s, which had kind of led to agricultural decollectivization and made the household once again the basic unit of the production, which is different from the collectivization period. So during this period, rural people worked in the township and the village enterprises to pursue non-farm opportunities. Women take up more responsibility in farming and also do some sideline work during the off-farm season. So men are given more priority, still do the work in the township and the village enterprises. Then after mid of the 1990s, the migration to other places has become more dominant compared to local non-farm opportunities, partially due to the inflow of the foreign direct investment, so which has kind of defeated the township and the village enterprises, makes many of the township and the enterprises manufacturing kind of collapsed. So based on this background, we wanted to find out what's really going on during the post-economic reform era. So the first question we ask, a woman in a more disadvantaged situation in obtaining non-farm jobs during the economic and post-economic reform era. Then over time, we've wanted to look at the temporal trends. So has the gender gap become more converged in terms of livelihood choices? So for instance, the farming versus non-farm and local non-farm versus distant non-farm, which is migration. Then we also want to look at does family status, that is marriage, impose a constraint for women to take on non-farm jobs? If so, has such constraint been lifted over time? So then we wanted to make some argument about some alternative hypothesis about the gender gap in the livelihood, non-farm livelihood distribution, and also we wanted to look at the temporal trends. So the first theoretical background that we wanted to offer is that the gender specialization. We wanted to find out if the gender role specialization perspective is still resilient to change in rural China. Basically, this theory argues that households seek specialized labor division in rural households, and women are seen as less efficient producers for income generation. So men usually get the priority to do more lucrative jobs. So if this kind of the gender role specialization perspective is resilient to change, then we expect that compared to women, men are more likely to engage in non-farm work, and this trend is resistant to change over time in terms of its temporal pattern. Then another perspective argues that actually rural households does not have that really strong gender role specialization attitude. Adopted in the transnational migration theory, scholars argue that actually gender roles in the rural areas have to give way to the benefit of the surviving chance. So it means that people will negotiate to see who can get a better chance to earn more money, which means that gender role can be reworked and then renegotiate, meaning it's malleable depending on the household situation. According to this perspective, gender roles are malleable, and gender ideology are also gradually shifting over time. So therefore, the feminist view may become more liberal on women's expanding space for their work. So given this perspective, we argue that due to the increased opportunities for women to contribute to the household by pursuing non-farming job during the economic reform era in China, over time, there will be a convergence of men and women in non-farm labor force participation. So then furthermore, we want to look at how the family status can kind of make a differentiation for this pattern we just argued. So there's this perspective, we mainly adopt the literature from the family status penalty perspective. So it argues that family care needs, especially the traditional domestic labor, division of labor, and the views toward a rural woman working outside of the home are still barriers for married women comparing to unmarried women. So therefore, we see marriage status as a family status barrier. So in labor market, employers prefer to hire young and unmarried women during the economic reform in Chinese city, which reduce the gender gap only among unmarried women, unmarried people. However, the potential temporal change of gender ideology may also have eroded such kind of marriage barrier for barrier for married women to expanding their space of work. So therefore, we kind of further expand our hypothesis, which is that marriage may set a constraint for rural women to pursue non-farm work in both local and non-local places. Then we also argue that the extent to which marriage forms a barrier for women taking non-farm job has reduced over time. So then another contribution we wanted to make is to make a distinction beyond the kind of binary comparison of the agriculture with non-agriculture, or the staying local comparing to migration. So we make a distinction. We expanded the livelihood choices to local non-farm job, distant migration comparing to agriculture job. So we have two arguments. One is the men's priority in expanding their work, we have mentioned before. And also there are more gender opportunities for urban areas than in rural areas. So based on this perspective, we hypothesize that women are more likely to pursue off-farm jobs in cities than in nearby towns. And then we also hypothesize there will be a convergence of the proportion of the men and women in local and distant non-farm job over time. So basically, the idea is that we argue that in the cities, the women would have better opportunities because there are more gender equal opportunities in cities comparing to the non-farm jobs in the local areas in the rural. And also, we are expecting over time, according to the temporal change, there will be a convergence of the proportion men and women in local and distant non-farm jobs. Because of the gender ideology would be transmitted back to the rural areas across time. So based on this hypothesis, we have been searching potential data which can help to answer our research question. So we have identified the China Health Nutrition Survey is a better choice comparing to other sources because it covers a period of the 29 years with 10 waves of the data. And to distinguish the local non-farming and distant migration, we only use the data on 1997 and onward. And in this study, we employ a multi-stage random. So this data, it employs a multi-stage random cluster sampling process to draw households from urban and rural areas in non-provinces of China. So we used a rural sample in the analysis because of the rural people, their chance to pursue non-farm job be quickly reduced after they turn to 50s. So we only include individuals who are 18 to 55 in our analysis. So the dependent variable for this study is what we mentioned. The three categories: the farm, local, non-farm, and distant migration. Due to the modeling complication, so we can do the binary comparison. And the key independent variable is gender and marital status. We look at because we focus on the gender gap. And we include the control variables, which are age, in education, household information, and also village and community level factors, which might impact both livelihood choices and their which might be associated with both their gender and marital status and the livelihood choices. So we use a cross-classified multi-level model in this case, which is also called a multi-level APC model, age and period and cohort model. So here we look at mainly focus on gender and marital status on livelihood choices. And we use the linear probability model because it's more appropriate for the multi-level model when the outcome variable is binary. And this is a first level model. We use gender, marital status, and all the control variables to predict the probability of pursue a particular kind of the non-farm job comparing to their reference categories such as a farm job. And then we want to look at the gender gap. So we use the and we focus on the period in changes. And we also wanted to control the cohort factors. So we use the period and the cohort to predict the intercept of the probability of pursuing a particular job. Then for the gender, we wanted to focus on the temporal changes, that is a periodical factors on the gender gap. So we only use the period cohort, we use the period random factor to predict the coefficient of the gender and fix the cohort effect for the coefficient. And afterwards, we combine the model. Then after we conduct the data analysis, we calculate the predicted probabilities. We use the following formula to calculate the predicted probability for the particular livelihood choices. So here I wanted to show some basic descriptive statistics first. So first one is rural people's livelihood strategy. That is data from 1989 to 2015. So we can see that for the people who pursue a farm-related job and non-farm-related job, on average, which is farm-related is slightly high, which is 55, and non-farm is 45. And then we use the 1997 onward data to look at the more specific livelihood choices by distinguish between local non-farm job and the distant non-farm job. We can see that it's roughly similar for the people who are doing the non-farm job and for the local non-farm and the distant non-farm job. And for people who stay in the farm-related job, we can see that it's 46% has been declined from the 1989 data to 2015, because this has a later start. So here are some of the key independent variables, especially marital status. Married man and is 37%, and married female is about 39%, and unmarried male is 14%, and unmarried female is close to 10%. And it has been slightly changed in the 1997 to 2015 sample. So here shows you more details about the change of the people's livelihood choices. So you can see that the people who pursue the farm job has been declining from 1989 to 2015. And then people have been doing the non-farm job has been increasing. So by 2015, nearly 2/3 of the people who are pursuing non-farm job, comparing to only 1/3 are in the farm. So based on our data, so the one who age 18 to 54. So then we move further to the 1997 to 2015 sample. The farm job and distant migration has been increasing, and the local non-farm also slightly increased, and farm-related job has been declining. And then we further show the distribution by gender and marital status. So this is unmarried male, and the following one is unmarried female. So unmarried male and unmarried female nearly have the identical trends. The predominantly they are doing the distant migration, like they are migrating as their livelihood choices, and a small proportion are staying in the farm and doing local non-farm. But when I look at the married male and the married female, we can see significant differences between the married man and the married female, and also comparing with unmarried male and female. And for married male, the people who are doing the distant migration has reduced, but still much large than married female. And also the local non-farm has a higher share. And for women, they are predominantly agriculture, staying agriculture as a livelihood choices. So this is our finding for the hierarchy EPC model. Also, first we look at the predicted probabilities of taking non-farm job instead of farm-related job from 1989 to 2015. We can see that instead of seeing a converging trend, we see they are slightly enlarged of their trends. They're diverging in terms of likelihood or probability of pursuing a non-farm job. So we can see that males chance probability is higher, although both men and females chance has been increasing. the female are still behind of the man. And this one look at this by marital status and gender. So in more recent years, the unmarried male and unmarried female, they become identical. But for the married male and unmarried female, their gap has been enlarging over time. So it means that although all of them have increasing chance to pursue non-farm job, but a woman's chance is always, married woman's chance is always behind of the married man and the unmarried man and a woman. So then we further conduct the binary comparison. This is the one is distant and non-farm comparing to farm related. It shows very similar patterns for the overall non-farm job comparing to farm related job. Then here is a local non-farm comparing with farm-related job, excluding migration as a livelihood choices. We can see that taking local non-farm as a livelihood choices did not change that much comparing the previous figure. So it has slightly increased, but men always get ahead compared to women, but the gap slightly increased. And then the right side shows by migration, by marital status and gender. It shows that for the local non-farm job comparing to farm-related job, the married man and the unmarried woman and man is nearly identical, and only married women are left behind. And we cannot see a converging trends over time. Then this one compare the migration, distant non-farm comparing to local non-farm. And we see that distant farm comparing to local non-farm, the gap is relatively smaller. But again, the unmarried man and unmarried females, they nearly have identical trends. And married man and married woman behind, but married man have a higher chance comparing to married woman. Then overall, we conclude that, so we first look at if there are gender labor division and its convergence. It shows that overall men are more likely to engage in non-farm work, and there's little sign of the convergence of the gender gap over time. And also the status of the being married is the main barrier for women to expand their space of work. So although the gap between unmarried man and unmarried woman has closed over time, there's no sign that the gap between married man and married woman is closing. So this combined together shows a pessimistic trend in terms of married women's potential in expanding their space of the work for livelihood choices compared to their male counterparts, as we did not see a converging trends to narrow the gap between man and a woman. So although these non-farm opportunities have increased for all men and women. So women, in particular married women, are behind men in expanding both local and distant non-farm livelihood choices. And the gap between married men and married women taking local non-farm jobs was kind of consistent over time, while the migration between the two groups has been enlarging. So what is the implication? So we argue that the livelihood choices of the rural people is a gender process, and there's a marital status gradient because the gap among the unmarried people have closed for gender, but the gap among the married people has been enlarging and no sign of the convergence over time. And a family and institution support are needed for rural women to continue to pursue non-farm jobs when they get married and have children. So we also wanted to point out there are some limitations. The first one, which we have been discussing, is the motherhood penalty for the women in rural China. So it seems that there are little discussion about a motherhood penalty among the rural men and women, among the rural women. And although we were trying to test to what extent motherhood has been serving as a family status penalty. Unfortunately, in the China Health Nutrition Survey, once people migrate, we are no longer obtain their very specific information. That means we cannot connect to their children, so to see if they really have children, if they're the age of their children. So we cannot test the motherhood penalty once a woman has been moved out to pursue a job in the urban areas. And also for the APC model, the multi-level APC model, which is merely designed for repeat cross-section data, a China Health Nutrition Survey, which is similar to a repeated cross-section, but it also has important components of the longitudinal design. So as a result, to kind of rule out the possibility of the clustering effect of the people who have been interviewed multiple times, we have randomly select only one observation if he or she has been interviewed multiple times. Although our findings are kind of identical, similar to the data set, we did not select one observation randomly. Okay, so this is the first study. We show the gender trends. Then after we show the gender trends among the agriculture, farm, local non-farm and distant non-farm jobs, we wanted to look at we wanted to look at how this have a consequence on rural households' economy. So then in second steps, we look at household heads' livelihood choices and their household income growth in rural China between 2010 to 2018. So for this background, we argue that there was a long debate about migration consequence to the rural household economy. The argument include information such as migration could benefit household economy by sending remittance. However, migration could also have negative consequences to household economy, such as labor loss from agriculture. It may not improve the household income compared to non-migrant households. But that has been really studied in Chinese rural context. And moreover, when we're comparing, people are always not clear who are they comparing. The study tended to compare migration with people who stay in the local, but did not make a distinction about the livelihood choices in the rural community. So in this study, we wanted to emphasize that it's important to consider people who stay in the local doing the non-farm job, because there are a large group of them, although their number is smaller than people who doing the non-farm job through migration and agriculture-related job, but still the number cannot be neglected due to the large size of it. So in this study, our motivation is focusing the key household members, which is to overcome the heterogeneous migration motivation of migrants. In particular, among households, household head takes different responsibilities comparing to non-household heads. So those non-household heads, such as a young man and a woman, they usually do not take much responsibility to household economical growth. So especially in more recent years, many of them migration just for their own adventures. So making money is less important compared to before. So that's why we wanted to focus on the key household members, a household head who takes primary responsibility for the household economy. So, and we also not only look at the overall economic return of migration compared to other livelihood choices, we also wanted to look at the growth trajectory of the different livelihood choices. So why household head? I just mentioned because it takes many responsibility. And based on the household life courses, we argue that it's very important to do a household analysis because their household head represents their age represents the age of the household. So if it's still in the young age, which means that the household is still growing. If in the older age, then the household has less potential to further grow the economic wealth. So we consider the age of the household head as from the life course perspective. Household head, household life course is closely linked with the labor allocation and wealth accumulation of household head household. So household head's age is a good proxy of the household life course choices stage. So here we just wanted to show briefly about our funding. So the data we use is the China Family Panel Studies from 2010 to 2018. We had the following sampling restriction. The first one is we focus on household head, the one who has a family decision-making power, instead of one who has been written on the hukou. We focus on those really who has been identified as a decision-making power of the household head. And it's a rural sample and a household heads with rural hukou, married, because we wanted to focus on the married household and who are aged 20 to 65. And we also wanted to include those people who have entirely migrant by their household. So we also include the rural hukou holders in urban areas because their livelihood choices is a migration. But our restriction condition is that they are both husband and wives are having rural hukou, and they also have stable family structures across wave. That means they did not experience divorce, remarriage, or death of the spouse. And in total, we have about 40,730 rural households, and among them, predominantly are males, like nearly 4,000 are males, comparing to about 800 of them are female heads, and which has contributed to 18,000 head a year observation. And the dependent variable is logged household net income per capita, and the independent variable is livelihood choice of the household head, which is farm jobs, local, non-farm, and a distant non-farm, age and gender, because we also look at the gender differences. And the control variables include the household head's education, gender, spouse, job type, and etc. So we use a growth curve model. So to save the time, I just briefly go over this. So we look at the both intercept and the slope to show the trajectory and the intercepting effect. So just to briefly show the trends between 2010 and 18 across the three types, which is consistent with what we have found in the first study. And then this is our result. The first model shows a full sample based on the growth curve model analysis. We're comparing to local non-farm. Doing household head doing farm will put them in a disadvantaged situation. However, so we can also say that there's no significant differences for migration and local non-farm. So for the household heads livelihood choices. However, when we look at the coefficient, so we can see that for the household heads age, when they get age, the people who has been pursuing farming, their chance accumulate their accumulation of household wealthy will across their age will decline, as well as the people who do migration. So that means although migration in general on average has no significant differences with local non-farm, however, when they grow, when their age increase, we can see that migration has gradually put them in a relatively disadvantaged situation for the household income. And we further conduct analysis by female and male, and we find the opposite result for male and female. For female, the migration can put them ahead comparing to staying local as household heads. But for male, if they are if the household head they primarily do the distant non-farm job, they would do better for their household comparing local non-farm. So then the distant migration, the coefficient shows a similar trends. So here just the graph shows that the migration is a red line. It's usually at the early ages for household heads. They will makes a household get ahead. But over time, it's still, especially when they're growing older, the non-farm will put them in a more advantageous situation, and the farming would be always left behind. So here, for male and female, here's male and here's female. The female, if they do migration, they are more beneficial comparing to staying local. So to summarize, the household head's livelihood choice is a strong predictor of the household income growth, both in terms intercept and slope. So migration of a household head is overall beneficial to rural household income growth. However, the positive effect is contingent on the household life. Its advantage is more obvious for younger households, the migration effect. The difference in income growth curve between the group attaching to farming and that taking local non-farm job confirms that the necessity of separating the two livelihood choices, that basically is a local non-farm comparing to distant migration, when we examine the left behind villagers in the study for the economic outcome. So of course, there are some limitations. The first one is selection of the livelihood choices, and also selection of the female household heads in traditional rural areas. And we can see that only a small proportion of them are female-headed household heads. And it must be relatively special. And there are also internal heterogeneity of the local non-farm jobs. So for instance, what are they really doing in the local areas? So as well as migration. So this is all my presentation. I will come any comments and suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yuying. If you can stop share, that'd be great.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So let me welcome and open the floor for questions. So Mujung had questions. So Mujung, please go ahead.
Yes. Hi, Tong Laoshi.
Hi,
Yeah,
good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, thank you very much for this very rich and interesting findings. So my question is actually a little bit about both projects, but more like tilted towards the first one. And so, yeah, it's sad to see like a very pessimistic trends for gender inequality reflected in this like spatial mobility among women. And so I'm actually wondering that to what extent that the actual gender inequality in this spatial livelihood is actually like more severe, in that I think also reflect a little bit in the second project that like over the period of like observed, there has also been a rising family migration And so meaning that like sometimes women, they may migrate together with their husbands, and more recently that more families bring along their children. And that means that even for those migrant women who get involved in this distant migration, it's also possible that they might be responsible for this gender role specialization in the urban areas if they migrate together with their husband and children. And so if there's like any sacrifices in non-farm works needed, probably the women are more likely to be expected to do so. Yeah, so I'm wondering if there like any patterns that can reflecting this trend. And yeah, what's your thoughts on this in general? Thank you.
Okay, and thank you so much, Mujin, for the great question. I think this is a very good observation. It's possible for women so always to be the one to be sacrificed when the household has a need. So as I showed in the pattern, women's constantly left behind. Comparing men in terms of their spatial mobility. So we can actually predict when there is a household need, a woman may be more likely to return to accommodate the agriculture need. And also even in the urban areas, they may also been doing a relatively disadvantaged job, especially when they are married, So I think it's very possible to have this kind of the trends. So however, we cannot kind of figure out a way how to use the data to trace if their women are more likely to return.
It involves like a more disrupted or shorter like durations for each migration episodes.
The short duration migration episode, and also more likely to return and stay longer to accommodate the agriculture need. And I think this is a very interesting point. I think maybe in the future, maybe we can use some data set, possibly the China family panel studies. I think I can have a look at that to see if it's feasible to look at the episode of the women's and men's migration and also return to what for them to return, especially like a unmarried to married transition. That would be really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And also, it's a pity that you mentioned at the end of the first presentation that motherhood status is not available, right? Because I think for women, probably the migration experience might be more life course driven, right? And so it's possible that before becoming a mother, they're freer, and so like migrate and focus on work. But upon becoming pregnant, and when the child is little, they may return, and like after the child is relatively older, and they may go back to cities to work, and so it's a pity.
I think it would be really interesting to look at their life course pattern of the work migration and or like childbirth transition back and forth. I think I'm trying to kind of explore a new project which will be related to their fertility pattern and their attitude toward the fertility.
Yeah, actually related to family migration, it seemed that in the second project, the spouses like migration status is also reflected, right?
Yes.
Yes. So like for example, it would be also interesting, right, to look at the spouse of the head when migrating together, to what extent can contribute to family economy, and if it's a woman in comparison to a man, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Thank you. We will look
Thank
at
you,
that.
童老师。
Good.
Thank you. 谢谢。
Thank you. Now I have Sun Hu who has questions. Sun Hu, do you want to start your question?
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for Professor Tong's very interesting presentation. So I have two questions. So the first question is I want to ask about the definition of doing farm job. So I'm wondering, you know, in the rural area, how can we distinguish between doing farm job and doing housework? And because I'm not sure whether there are some sample in the data whose economic activity is doing housework, and yeah, so I'm quite interested in this point. Another question is about whether there are any regional differences in China, because so for the first survey, it was conducted in 9 provinces, and so you know, in China, in different areas, so their gender role norm are very different. For example, in northern China, especially northwest China, so there is very strong traditional gender norm, and yeah, so I'm very curious about the regional differences. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. These are two very important questions. Actually, this first one, we have been kind of struggling about how to define the farm jobs. So some of them, you know, in rural China, when you ask people, what are you doing in the questionnaire, they kind of reflect one is farm and the other kind of I'm 家庭主妇, I'm doing the housework. So one of the approach we have been using is kind of exclude all those people who just claim they are doing housework. So we say they do not have a livelihood strategy. So we had previously excluded that part of the people, and the trends, like the funding we have showed is. Although it's largely similar to what I presented today, but the gender gap is slightly smaller comparing to what we present now. So then later, we have been talking about why we exclude these people, because for rural people, if they say they are doing housework, and there's no clear boundary about doing farm and housework, because you're doing the livestock, they raise the livestock, they're doing the farm, probably they do not know farm is a work. So, so then later we decide according to the situation of the rural China. So we decided to put it back for people who claim they do housework. For those women to see them as doing the farm. So this is what we did. And for the region differences, I think we have included the region into it. But I forgot how we did that, like for every province, or we kind of combined into 4 regions. So because that part was mainly conducted by my co-author, so I will have a close check later on. But thank you for reminding me about that.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Yeah.
Okay, we had the next question is from Veronica. Veronica, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to, I'm based here in Singapore, I'm Irish, and it's interesting to hear your research in terms of China, because in Ireland we've had this, you know, migration and this whole situation, and it's very interesting to hear your results and the nature of the dependent and independent variables you selected. But I was wondering and interested to get your comment or observations more so on this pattern where the unmarried young people who are moving to the urban non-farm jobs, it's showing an increasing positivity or trajectory, that the difference is more minimal and becoming increasingly minimal. And I wondered, do you feel is it cultural values or economic necessity? Which of those things do you think is impacting those choices? Like, is the cultural push-pull less on the women, or is it, you know, what's going on there? Because I know it wasn't the key thing in the study, but from the data you gathered, some things might be coming true. It seems hopeful that perhaps the cultural and economic maybe, you know, both as important. I don't know, but I'm interested to hear what you think.
Okay, thank you so much for this very interesting question. I actually, although I'm mainly focused on the gender gap, but I'm really interested in the unmarried men and women. It seems their gap has been closed, and the women are largely choose a non-farm job, and especially migration. So regardless if it's more economical push factors or the culture change, I would say, so in my personal opinion, based on my past research experience and my familiarity with the rural China, I tended to explain it more as a culture trend. So because the younger generation now more likely to see migration as a life experience, a trajectory they must do, because they're no longer willing to stay in the rural areas doing like a farm work. It's just like us, we wanted to go to college. For them, many of them, they even lack of the interest in study or cannot get into college. Every family are striving to send their children to college, but some of them are not really interested in go to college. They don't like study, so they wanted to, but they still wanted to pursue kind of a non-agricultural life. So they go to city, and there are jobs available for them, especially for young women. A lot of the service sectors open, and industry and the construction line, and not construction line, the production line has a high demand for young women, and the service sector also have a high demand. So there is economic pulling factors, but I think the push factors is mainly driven by culture change. They wanted to have a different lifestyles. Actually, if they stay in the rural China, their economic perspective is not that bad comparing to migrating to urban, because currently in the rural China, many people are migrating. If you really stay on the farm, you still have a good opportunity to achieve even a better economic return than working in the urban sector, like wages, etc. But
okay, yeah,
this is a different life choice.
Yeah, it is. I've just one more related question, if I have time, if that's okay.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm also interested to hear what you have to say when you were getting from that data you gathered. I don't know fully what the cultural and legal aspect is on inheritance of land, or, you know, farm work, or who owns the farm, and all of those things in this rural landscape you're talking about. In Ireland, we have a situation where it would be the farm always went to the eldest son, you know, and farming and everything to do with it was a male-dominated kind of environment. So I just wonder, culturally again, culturally and legally, how does it work in this population study?
Yes, that's a good question. Like legally in China, nobody owns the land, so the households only have the right to use the land. So they have it's like the government subcontract called a household contract responsibility system. The government contracts the land to household to use. They do not have the ownership. Nobody has the ownership of the land, so but they can work on it. So for
the ownership of the right, is the ownership of the right held with the men, or is it held with the women, or is it just held at a household level?
Oh, you mean between son and daughter?
Yeah, like when they are working this piece of land that they have the responsibility for, is that responsibility allocated to the male or the female?
Yeah, actually, it's both man and a female, both daughter and son. So
Okay.
both daughter and son will have the right of the land, because when the government allocates the land, is based on the house number of the people in the household in the household. So both the daughters and son have
Good.
their allocation of that. But usually they work collectively as a household. So they do not truly can distinguish this is yours, this is my. They work together, but the daughter does have the land use right.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Anyone else have more questions? Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much, Yuying, for your presentation and sharing your work with us. And we really appreciate it and looking forward to welcome you next time and speak to us in person in Singapore. And before then, I guess we'll see you at the PAA.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone and have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
Bye.